Well, friends, it is now my honour to introduce to you our second keynote speaker for today, Dr. Michael McAfee. Here in Australia today, conversations about reform and review are increasingly looking at models of place-based collective impact service delivery as not only a methodology, but an underpinning approach to theory for providing targeted, wraparound, holistic services for children, families, and communities who we work with and who are a part of our community. Our guest today, Dr. Michael McAfee, is from the US, where he currently leads PolicyLink, a national research and action institute focused on advancing racial and economic equity, just and fair inclusion for everyone living in America. Under his leadership, PolicyLink has emerged as a national leader in building cradle-to-career systems to ensure that children and youth in some of the most distressed communities have a pathway out, a hope. He partnered with local leaders in more than 60 communities in 27 states and the District of Columbia, and in doing so, those projects have led to significant improvements in education and developmental outcomes for more than 300,000 children, raising more than $1 billion in the process. I'll let that settle for a moment. 300,000 children. To give it a local flavour, that's nearly the entire population of Newcastle. And these are young children who now have hope of a different future. Michael has had an extensive career in the public and not-for-profit sectors, as well as serving on a number of boards. He earned his Doctorate of Education in Human and Organisation Learning from George Washington University and completed the Harvard University's Executive Program in Public Management. Michael is passionate, committed, charismatic. He's not paying me to say that, it's actually true. And incredibly enthusiastic about the work he leads. And it's wonderful that we have him here today to speak to us. Please, I invite you all to join me in welcoming Dr. McAfee to the stage.
Good morning. How are you all doing? The energy's kind of low this morning. I understand. My energy is low as well. That jet lag has hit me. What I wanted to do today is first I wanted to thank you. I've been coming back to Australia usually twice a year for the last 5 years. And I keep coming back because there's a lot of what you're doing that is ahead of where the United States is. And I don't know if you all know that often or get a sense of that. And so I take a lot back to try to improve our government and the way we do work, and we really need it right now. It's a tough time in the United States. And so what I want to do is to talk to you about a couple of things that is born out of this work. I'm going to talk to you about people, power, and place. And I'm going to try to signal some things that you might learn from us not to do in hopes that you can continue to have a nation that is strong, a democracy that is strong, have a citizenry that is supported and developed. Because there's two things that we're holding right now in our nation. A lot of good stuff is happening, but a lot of toxic stuff is happening because we've refused to deal with a lot of underlying issues for many, many years, and now they're coming to a head. And so I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to be holding those tensions. I'm also not trying to tell you what to do, because I think that's pretty arrogant. I'm going to talk to you from my own perspective. I'm sharing with you my perspective, my interpretation of the world, and that's all I'm sharing. Your job is to figure out how you want to make sense of the world and what you want to do. And so before I start, can I just hear a couple of people tell me what's on your mind? If I was to really give you the best, join you where you're at today, what questions are on your mind that you'd want to hear me speak to? Just a couple of folks. What's on your mind? Just holler it out. Or you want me to get back on that plane and go home? What's on your mind? How to share power more equitably? How do we ensure that Aboriginal children get the best start in life? By listening and hearing from their community members. How do we ensure folks have access to the best training so that they can provide the best quality of service, correct? Thank you. Collective impact? It's such a large word. All right, I'm gonna start there and go into things. I think collective impact is BS. Let me tell you why. Don't run me out of the room yet. Let me tell you why. The brilliance is not in a frame. The brilliance is not in a frame. And I keep watching really good frames get butchered because we don't have the courage to do the work. Collective impact is not a bad frame. I thought it was a powerful galvanizing frame, but I've watched it get butchered all over the world. And it's gotten butchered all over the world because of a couple things. Collective impact, there are some assumptions embedded in that. That there's a reason why we should be coming together to do stuff collectively. And the biggest assumption is that the work is too big and too hard for one person or one institution. And so often we got folks coming together to talk about collective impact, but it's really something they could have still done on their own. So now you've really just confounded things, right? Because you're trying to collaborate around something that doesn't take 5 people to do. And so the whole notion, the aspiration of collective impact is lost because what usually happens when you bring practitioners in the room, because of the way our funding is, we devolve into just what is doable. And the moment you devolve into what's doable, you have devolved into mediocrity. And so the aspiration of the frame is lost instantaneously. Does that make sense? And I'm telling you this having worked with President Obama to help with Promised Neighborhoods, which was a big collective impact. So I've had a lot of fights and a lot of scars about this. So while I'm here today, I'm happy in the hallways or whatever to break down this even further. What you really hear me saying is this. We are at a moment around the world where the magic is not going to be found in another buzzword. The magic is not going to be found in more training. The magic is not going to be found if you just read another book. The magic's not going to be found if you just bring another person in to talk to you. The question is, how will you use yourself as an instrument to bring about the change you want to see in the world? And this is often the place that we run away from the most. There is so much I can do with my voice and my power, whether I feel it or not. I'm in the seat, so I got something. And too many of our institutions are not using that. So let's start there when we talk about people. Most people can't tell you who the hell they serve. How tragic. How tragic to spend your whole life trying to get into a position of leadership. And then you're too darn afraid to speak on behalf of the people who need you to say something. This is the first structural problem in collective impact or any impact. Folks don't know who they serve. They don't know who they really want to fight for. And I'll give you a good example. I spent my whole life trying to get out of poverty. I'm out of poverty now. Trump's tax cuts doing great for me. But for the majority of Americans, they're not. And now that I'm finally in a position where I can do really some good stuff, imagine if now I couldn't use that voice because I was afraid. I was afraid to keep my job. I was afraid to keep my mortgage. I was afraid because people might not like me. And I'm not saying all those things aren't important. But if those are the things that I care about, there are a lot of other places I can go work and make a lot more money. I can go into investment banking if I want to just be quiet and make money and not have to fight. You see my point? But there are some places that are sacred. And I consider our work sacred. So if you want to do this work, you need to come to it with a sacred heart. My population is the 100 million folks in America living at 200% of poverty. That's 1 in 3 Americans who are economically insecure, folks. 1 in 3 Americans who are economically insecure. That's my population. Now, can I do that all by myself or with PolicyLink? No. But that then calls in why collective impact would be important, because it means for me to be able to have the impact on my population, I've got to join with others in a different way. There's no way out of it. I don't like collaboration, but if I want to do my job, I've got to submit to the strengths of others. When you know your population and it's worthy of the moment, frameworks become irrelevant because you'll do what is necessary. I'm talking to you because I think the way we all enter the story of our legacy of impact is being clear about the people that we serve. The reason why I'm clear about that 100 million is because the rooms that I get invited in could have me being titillated by Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of Chase. It could have me being titillated by the next president. It could have me being titillated by being at Harvard or something. But that's not who I serve. Those are simply privileges that are afforded to me now in my walkabout in life. But I could easily get it twisted and think that those are the folks that I should be serving. Does that make sense? They're not. And the reason why our democracies and our institutions are failing is because too many of our leaders have forgotten who they serve. They serve business. They serve ideology. They serve having to prove points on a political spectrum. If you look at our debates right now, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, it doesn't really matter. You haven't been serving the 100 million, period. It just hasn't been really happening. President Obama was afraid to say black folks, and he's black. Think about how sad that is. So I'm not having a political conversation with you because I think political ideology is failing us. Because our institutional leaders have been afraid to say, this is what this population needs. In this case, you all could say, hey, this is what poor folks need here. This is what Aboriginal folks need here. And when I walk in a room, I'm carrying that interest. When I walk in a room, I'm carrying the interest of those folks because I understand the privilege that I have. And that means I also have to accept the consequences of what comes with that. There will be places I don't get invited to. There will be folks who I can't really have a deep connection with and be buds with because they're not down with that. And that's okay. I didn't come into this sector to be friends with everybody. I came into this sector to get some work done. What I'm signaling to you is the way that I choose to show up in the world. And for me in America, as an African-American man, which is really rare to be in this position, that comes with huge sanction. But it doesn't really matter because if you are as good as you think you are, you will be okay. And my superpower is I've come out of poverty, so I know how to survive. There's not a lot you're going to do to me when you marry book smarts and street smarts. You are deadly. And there are a lot of you in this room that are that way. So it doesn't really matter if you get mad about what I'm talking about. Who cares? I'm already liberated. I know what going back to poverty looks like. And I know how to survive it. That's the worst you can do to me. And when you can settle up with what's the worst that can happen, you can then be free to do the work that you need to do. So what you hear me saying to you folks is, people is foundational. It's not a gratuitous thing. It's got to be in your heart and in your action. I'm fighting for the 100 million. That's it. I'm not fighting for business. I'm not romanticizing wealthy folks. I'm also not demonizing them. The 100 million is my population. Now, getting to power. People and power in place is what we're going to talk about.
So people is who do you serve? Power is how do you want to stop systems of oppression from hurting people? We often enter the story around services. I think that's a smokescreen, folks. You all are doing amazing work, and you get shit on because systems undercut your good work. And no one that ever wants to talk about the system. They'll just tell you, well, we gave them $600 million. Why aren't things getting better? There's no damn evidence that says just because you spend a lot of money, things will get better. That's not an evidence-based statement. It's also not an evidence-based statement when you won't tend to the structural ways oppression is hiding in plain sight in every community. I'll give you a good example. In America, we're doing all of this great work to get people to have traditional bank accounts, to get their credit scores up, to get them to start managing their money well. And then our local governments are making decisions to over-police the poor neighborhoods with traffic stops and other things that is stripping the very wealth that the folks like you in this room are building up in folks. Now that is an oppressive decision. To say that I will finance the back of our local government off of poor people because you know what? They won't have legal counsel. They can't afford to go fight this in court. That's oppression. If you want to do that, do it in my neighborhood. You don't do it in my neighborhood because you know you'd never stay in office if you did. You would never stay in office if you implemented that same policy. And in your community, there are oppressive things happening like that that is hiding in plain sight every day. And here's the problem of saying, well, you know, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't impact me. Well, now, this is where America is crazy, and it's struggling right now with this tension. It designed a world to extract, steal, and exploit black folks, Asians, poor whites, etc. But it really designed all of that, starting with anti-blackness. And now, while we are now 400 years past slavery, people just want it to all go away. Why do you keep talking about it? The insidious design, though, is that the design effects have not gone away. And now those design effects are contaminating white folks. If you are white and you want to move to this wonderful San Francisco where I live and you see these beautiful buildings and this beautiful bay and wine country, and you have kids, you can't. Because you can't afford a minimum of $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom and private school for your kids. Because you neglected public education because it was for those black kids. So 30 years ago when we started busing and trying to desegregate schools, we gave up on public education because we felt like it was for black folks. And we started creating our own parallel systems, charter schools, private schools, Catholic schools. My parents sent me to private school. They didn't realize in making that decision, they were just trying to do the best thing they could for their baby. But what they seeded in that conversation, which is what is good public infrastructure that everybody should access? And now, fast forward 30 years later, you see why white folks are mad now. Because an oppressive economy now has leaped over black folks and it's hurting them. If you read Dying of Whiteness, you will see that white men are actually, their mortality rates are increasing faster than black folks now. Now, what I say to them is, why are you mad at me? You've won. You've gotten exactly what you said you wanted. You got rid of worker protections, labor protections, you got rid of unions. You created parallel universes. It wasn't designed to be inclusive for everyone, and now it's contaminating. And I'm sharing that because it's a warning for you to think about the systems that will ultimately leap over the very folks you thought you were oppressing, and they will hurt everybody. And it's like a cancer that by the time you see it, it's too late. San Francisco is also fascinating because it's one of the most liberal, it is probably the liberal city in the country, in the most liberal state. And yet it's done what even we say, quote, the racist South hasn't done. It's kicked out all the people of color and the middle class. There's only about 5% black folks in San Francisco. There is no middle class. People drive for 2 hours just to be a teacher. What I'm signaling to you is this. When we didn't center the 100 million, when we didn't center them, when we didn't center the care for them, when we didn't center their agency, their power, we now have a huge design problem. Because the majority of folks in America who are poor work 2 jobs. But the narrative is just lazy folks. Why don't they get a job? But when you look at the data says that the majority of folks who are poor in America work 2 jobs. Now, what are you supposed to do? What I'm signaling to you that our job now is to manifest our power to design nations that work for everyone. That's our job now. Services ain't gonna solve that problem. So I'm asking you to hold two tensions. I'm asking you to hold the tension that absolutely we need to tend to immediate human need. That's charity. Nothing wrong with it, it's needed. But don't conflate charity with transformation. Redesigning the nation so that they actually work for everyone, starting with the least of us, is our job. And why? I'm so baffled by that. Many of us, that's our faith orientation, and yet we come to work and we skip right over it. So how do we go to work? How do we go to our faith communities and then act like we're doing something different? It is the ultimate irony for me in the States that we actually don't even center what our faith orientations, the dominant faith orientations, would call us to do. We center business. And then when business screws us, we get mad. But the nature and logic of capitalism is to oppress labor. That's its design. Now, our job has to be, can we make capitalism be better? Some people will say you need to come up with a radically new system. Others would say you need to try to modify it. I don't know what's the right answer. What I do know is this. That's the work we should be doing, to figure it out. Because until we figure out how to stop an oppressive economy from harming folks, we actually can't deal to the health issues, the education issues, all these other issues. They are byproducts of a design of a society that is not working. And we keep putting it off and trying to hide behind fancy little articles, fancy frameworks like collective impact, new training modalities, new different speeches, and it's all bullshit. The reality is, if you want to improve this nation so you get better outcomes, change the design of the nation where it needs to be enhanced. That's real power. That's real power. Real power says that this nation should maximally work for people, not business. Or if you want, real power would say it should work for both equally. That's the opportunity. That's the opportunity for us in the States, to not critique business. Business is critical. But don't lift business up on a pedestal at the expense of the 100 million. That's power. And our job has to be to use our voice to bring that change about. And here's what I know. When I'm in rooms like this in the United States, the professionals are scared to death. They're looking at me like, Michael, what the hell are you talking about? I can't do that. I can't use my voice. I can't say anything. Well, this is then when I say, then we should just all close up our shops. We do know direct cash transfers are evidence-based. They do work. Giving poor people money directly does work. There is evidence around that all over the country. So if we are afraid to do our jobs, there is a better solution. But we don't even want to do that solution. But yet we'll give tax breaks to businesses, et cetera, to the wealthy. We'll give me tax breaks, et cetera. But when it comes to giving the very folks who need real cash in their hands, we say, oh, we can't do it. And yet we'll stand up and say, well, we should look for evidence-based practice. Hell, the evidence-based practice is cash transfers. That is the evidence-based practice. So what is your bias against it when you do it for everybody else? Power says we normalize these types of relationships. We call this type of stuff out, and we do something about it. And here's why I'm raising this. Because you can't transform place if you don't. Place is designed. It is planned. And we never deal with the design treatment of it. Segregation in America was designed by the American Planning Association. All those planners who went through the academy, they learned to design communities where white folks were over here, Poles were over there, Irish were over here, black folks were over there. It didn't just happen with natural migration patterns. If you read The Color of Law, you will see the beautiful design of segregation in America. I'm giving you these books because some of you might be saying, he's crazy. I just want you to be able to just have reference material. That way you can just go and read for yourself. The design is real. So I want you to think about place, and I want you to think about the design. Don't think about social services first. Social services is cleaning up the mess. People keep asking us to clean up the mess from the design challenges. I simply want to invert that. I'm trying to be more results-based and make sure that taxpayer dollars that come to services can be maximized by being honest about something. My small investment of charitable service-oriented dollars are getting trumped by the oppressive designs of our communities. And if you want me to get to better results, you gotta hold both of these tensions and not just come over to our sector and tell us what we ought to do all the time. Don't you get tired of that? People want to tell you should talk about collective impact, you should get more results, you should be more evidence-based, you should do this, you should do that. Why aren't our numbers getting better? Why? But then the moment you say something about business, oh, well, we can't talk about that. The moment you talk about the design of oppression in the states, people say, oh, we can't talk about that. You must talk about it. And the reason why I said that if you can't, really we should all go home, is for this reason. We have such a developed philanthropy in the United States. We have so much wealth in the United States. We have so many social serving institutions in the United States. But guess who's having the most impact right now in the United States? People who don't have any trappings of power. The Parkland kids in Florida for the shootings that happened. The Black Lives Matter kids. The Latinx kids who were dreamers. All of our organizations have been around for 20 plus years and haven't been able to do what the hell they've been able to do. As an institutional leader, I better look at that and ask, well, what is the problem? First of all, why do they have to go to the street if we've got all these nonprofits? Why do they have to go to the street when we have all these nonprofits? They're going to the street because those of us in power, like myself, actually aren't owning their population. So they're in pain. We're not resolving it. So they're going to the streets. And then when they go to the streets, we have the audacity to critique how they go to the streets. I really wish they would stop all this screaming and yelling. Why are they talking about Black Lives Matter? Well, hell, if you was talking about it 20 years ago, they would never even be talking about it. This is the irony of it all, that the more professional we get, the less impact we're really having because we're losing our heart and our voice and our courage. And I'm showing you that so that it can be a warning to you all here that the folks who are putting things on our national conversation and our discourse are young people. The folks who are driving the politicians to be more courageous, the Democratic Party would not be as courageous as all the policy platforms you see right now if it was not for young people. That is not happening because of think tanks like mine. That's happening because of young people, folks. So here's the thing. They're opening the door for us to step right through and join them and help them. We can hide behind them if we're scared. We can hide behind them and walk right on through that door and get the society that we want. And we're still after they've cleared the field for us, we're still too afraid to walk through the door. What I'm signaling to you is this. Place will transform when those of us in power honor the people that we're privileged to be in relationship with. That's just the reality. And if you hide behind all this other stuff that is work avoidance, like webinars and trainings and conferences, with all due respect, I don't know anybody who eats that stuff, who's housed by that stuff, whose income gets raised by that stuff. It has its place. Don't get me wrong, it has its place, but that is not the work. The primary work is transforming the legal and regulatory framework of our democracy so that they finally can realize the ideal embodied in them, that they work for everyone. Everyone. And then we can get to the magic of how do we improve our practice? How do we bring greater discipline to our work so that we can get greater results? For example, how many of you all use the discipline of RBA or Six Sigma or something? How many? A few? This is a huge problem, folks. This goes to your question specifically. Our universities aren't training us to come out and really get the results that we want. Calling a meeting and bringing people together and hoping for a new possibility is not disciplined practice. In fact, it's malpractice. Because what it means is basically you can't hold all the energy of the competing interests when you bring them together. What I want you to begin to think about is imagine a coach. Imagine a coach that can't get the players to execute the offense and defense. That's often what's happening when we're trying to solve problems in community. We're convening, but we're missing that system by which we get people into a system where they can perform, because our job is to extract contribution in service of a result and an indicator. And if you don't have a system that you've mastered, you're leaving too much on the table. So what you hear me signaling to you today is, who do you serve and what's your number? You see me signaling my number is 100 million. 26% of that is white folks. I serve everybody. That's the beauty of a big number. You don't have to choose. Your job should be. Our job now is to serve everyone and bring everybody up. The second, when it comes to power, is the question of how will I use mine, real or perceived? Even on days when I don't feel like I have it. Because many of you in this room who you run stuff, you know you don't have no power for real. Every day is a negotiation with your staff, with stakeholders, etc. But the reality is, something is inured to you by the benefit of you being in that seat. Use that privilege. Use that privilege to speak truth to power about what needs to happen, and you can change the conversation. What I'm signaling to you is, not theoretical. I'm signaling to you the journey that I've been on the last 8 years at PolicyLink, but the last year in this role. I'm signaling it's not enough just to critique what's going on in America. I actually do have the agency to begin to chart a path forward. So when I'm talking to you about redesigning the legal and regulatory framework of the nation, that's the work that I'm actually engaged in by pulling my colleagues together in the sector. Now, no one authorized me to do that, and no one ever will. I can just simply see my role in a different way. I'm seeing my role as the one who should set the terms of engagement. I shouldn't let government set the terms of engagement. I'm closest to the people, so are you. Tenders should be designed based on your experience in this room, not what's politically expedient. Tenders should be designed based on what you know the people need. The only reason it's not right now is you haven't wielded the power to set the terms. If the equity movement in the United States, of which I'm a part of, is going to be powerful, I've got to set the terms of that engagement. I've got to align my peers to achieve collective impact. I've got to be willing to measure progress, not just of my own organization, but of the work we're doing collectively. And then I've got to wield the power to compel people, no matter whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independent, to honor the agenda that we've set. That's the work for our generation. Now, that's probably 20 years worth of work. I'll probably get fired in around the 5th year because it's perilous work. But that is the game. So what I'm signaling to you is you all are doing amazing work. Continue to do it. What I'm asking you to think about is, how do you accelerate to the impact that I know the minister in this room wants you to have? How do you accelerate to it? How do you learn from other places that haven't been doing it right, like the US? So you don't have your democracy almost brought to its knees at the very moment where it should be rising. If you do this, if you can think about and fight for people, everyday folks, the reason why you came to this sector in the first place, the world's gonna get better. If you can reposition power relationships to be more inclusive, not exclusive, the world's gonna get better. And if you can think about the design of places that actually work for everyone, the world is gonna get better. This is our moment, this is our charge to create a world where everybody can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So thank you. Questions? I think we have time for a few questions. A couple of questions. What's on your mind?
The policies on offer seem to us to be part of a change of system, and it was to benefit, or it looked like it was to benefit our version of the 100 million, and yet the 100 million rejected it. So I'm interested if you knew anything about that and you had some observations about that.
I did know about that, and you see the same thing happen in America. It happens in America because we racialize policy. There are disconnects in our citizenry that we've got to clear up. Like, the narrative in America is that black folks are the biggest purveyors of welfare. No, they're not actually. They're in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and they're poor whites. But poor whites need that story to feel like they still are better than black folks. Politicians know that, and they play on it every election cycle. I always say to people will say to me, don't talk about race, but I'm like, hell, watch this election cycle. No black person is talking about hating white people. It's white folks who always go there. And so this is a tension in our citizenry because we've been trained to not know our history. So right now in America, the history that I just shared with you, 99% of Americans do not know it. They do not know that oppression was designed. They do not know that today Wells Fargo Bank has still been fined for discriminating, housing discrimination last year. They would just think, oh, this was in the past. No, it's not. It's very real today. Flint, Michigan, we're killing kids because the water pipes still haven't been fixed. This is another really good example. But they'll tell you, you should be helping them out. The reality is what we know about lead and the development of the brain is that if you're going to poison them with lead, don't ask the nonprofit sector to get better educational outcomes for them in years 3, 5, 6, 7 on down the line. You see my point? This is what we're doing every day. There is work we have to do to our electorate, and we must speak to our electorate. So here's what I'm doing. When I told you that story of what I say to white folks, when I say, you know what, Mr. White Person, Mrs. White Person, I took your racist advice. You told us to take our lazy black asses and get a job. We did. Now the most educated group is black women in America. But you didn't take your own advice. And so now that you also said, I love business, get rid of jobs, get rid of the union, do whatever business want. And now that business took those jobs and took them overseas, and your ass is still left there in the countryside, and you can't move to the city and compete, I started using that narrative because it broke through. It broke through because I was using how they saw me, but would never speak it to my face, to really disrupt their way of thinking. And I can't tell you how many folks have called me and said, man, I was really mad when you said that, and I had to go home and think about it. I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're mad at me, but you got 100% of what you wanted. You got 100% of what you wanted. You just didn't think about what it would mean for you. And so we've got to communicate to our citizenry, folks, for real. And we've got to get away from just trying to use all this nice passive language and say what's really real. That is really real. Now, most folks don't work at a place where they could have the luxury of saying it and not be fired. That's the gift of where I work. That I can actually do the real work that can have breakthroughs. So what I want you to think about is, if you're going to do collective impact work, it is absolutely services. It is absolutely educating the citizenry. And it is absolutely thinking about systems and policy changes. And our job has to be to put this on a long time horizon, folks. This is 20 plus years worth of work. If you read the most recent Economist, it talks about how societies really change. They generally change as people die off. Pretty sad, right? So it means we need to start working with young people right now to get it. Yeah, is there one more and then we'll go? Are we good? Good? Time?
We are at
Cool.
time.
Thank you all.
What I will say, I have some notes here that if we were running short, we could have more questions, but that won't be our issue today. Michael, we do have some time at the end of our speakers, and I would encourage everyone, because there are lots of hands here, to write your questions down so that we have the full benefit of all of our keynotes that you can ask questions to at the end.
You got it.
So, Michael, without any further ado, thank you for inviting us to be courageous and for your presentation. Thank you so much.